Thanks for joining us. We are trying something new, and it is a sabbatical season, and so welcome to Church Without Borders and
Pod be with you from the Congregational Church of Batavia and the First Congregational Church of Dundee.
So, the reason we're trying something new, we have a lot of colleagues going on sabbatical
It's a sabbatical summer.
It is a sabbatical summer. So, combine effort here and loving it. So, not left behind and loving it. That's a whole different thing.
No, loving every minute of it.
That's it. Boom, boom. So, before we recap from our last Church Without Borders, we're going to open in prayer. We didn't decide who was going to do that, so I'm just taking the prayer. So there we go. Grant us your peace, grant us your presence in this moment, in every moment, as we gather and reflect on your scripture in our lives, in our community, in every stage of our being. Lord, may we feel not only your presence here with us, but feel your joy, your hope, your laughter. Into this moment of study, we give thanks for who you are and whose we are. Amen. And now let us recap. Pastor Scott, take it away.
Yeah, so last week we were in Revelation 19, no, we were in
21
Revelation
and 22.
21 and 22, and talking about a little bit of backdrop of the book of Revelation, singular, and also apocalyptic book, some of the characteristics of apocalyptic books, and how some modern cultural interpretation really might take away from what the book has to say about how do you maintain your call to follow Jesus in when it comes up against powers or systematic economic systems or political or military systems of empire or power that may not reflect who Jesus is or who God calls us to be as people of faith. And the present day versus a ending of a present evil and a resetting of time, not necessarily always the end, capital E, apocalyptic end of all things, but an end to the current persecution and a resetting and a new beginning. We talked about the new heaven, new earth, and some of the nuances of that vision and language and some of the things that might take us by surprise from it. So if you missed it last week, go back and check it out. You can retread it. And but today we are on a Pod Be With You topic, and Paige will introduce that to us. Here
Absolutely. One of the things that we've been talking, so Pod Be With You is the podcast that I do with Aaron James, who's the pastor of the First Congregational Church of Dundee, and he also is on sabbatical. Again, it is sabbatical summer. Everybody is off doing wonderful things, and so that's why we're joining forces here to be able to do these things together. And one of the things we've been talking about is the sermon series that we've been doing at my church, the Congregational Church of Batavia. Since Easter and through this Sunday, we've been doing a series on sacramental living. In which we've been exploring not just the sacraments, because we only have 2 of them. That would be 2 Sundays. It would be really short. We'd be done.
Short series.
Of baptism and communion. But those sacramental moments in our worship where it feels as if God draws near to us in a special, unique sort of way. And so we have, of course, studied baptism and communion, but we also jumped in to talk about confirmation, weddings. Last week we talked about joining the church and how God comes near to us in church membership and faith community in a unique and special way. And we are ending this series this week, appropriately, I think, to talk about Christian funeral. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, but I also hope we can talk a little bit about one of my favorite funeral scriptures, if you can call it that. That sounds a little bit dark, and I'm sorry, but it's a really great passage that comes out of Romans, and I tend to use it and lean into it regularly when I'm doing end-of-life stuff with folks. And so, do you want me to read that now, or did you
Yeah,
want
let's have it.
All right, let's do it. This is Romans 8, 31 through 39, and it's Paul at his eloquent best, which is always a good thing. He really knows what he's doing. So here we go. What then are we to say about these things? If God is for us, who is against us? He who did not withhold his own son, but gave him up for all of us, will he not with him also give us everything else? Who will bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? It is Jesus Christ who died, yes, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed intercedes for us. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? For it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are counted as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. And that ends our no, but in some ways that could be just a standalone piece. I don't know about the two of you, but I do know about the two of you. So let me change that. As pastors, one of the things that we do is a lot of funerals, and I end up doing even more than I would regularly do because I have a connection with the funeral home. In Dundee, I'm the backup pastor for families that don't have somebody, so I get called in.
Yep.
And for me, funerals are actually a real privilege and an honor to be invited to come in and walk alongside people in their grief and offer a word of hope about what it is that we really believe about the nature of God and God's journeying with us in the world. So I did say that I would start with this. I claim it right out front. Of all of the things that I get to do in the church, I would rather do a funeral than a wedding any day of the week.
Yes.
Because I know how it ends. I know, and I believe, Scott, you were saying earlier, nobody's going to complain.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And that gave me the chance to throw in like my favorite Ecclesiastes, so Ecclesiastes 7:1, right? So the first part I usually forget. A good name is better than a fine perfume, but the day of death better than the day of birth.
Right.
And that's usually hard to explain to people, but because you know how it ends.
Right.
And it's that peace and it's hard to explain how is the day of death better than the day of birth, but if you're me, that being present at a funeral and understanding that celebration, that final homecoming, and life is challenging, life is struggle. I'd be a very good Buddhist. Then knowing all of those things are behind you at that day of death, and you are truly at home and with all of the saints who have gone before, right? You are one of those now at that day of death and celebrating that moment. So a day of death is truly a celebration moment. Mm-hmm. It is possibly a struggle for those who are still living, but there is something celebrating a day of death, and perhaps I'm presupposing a life well lived, but those are most frequently, you find those things that have been lived well in a person's life, and you lift those up and honor those and celebrate those. In funeral. So I'm seeing you look.
No, I have a couple points.
Yes.
You just threw out one of them. Presupposing a life well lived. I think there's when a person is on a deathbed, that's a very different scenario than a kid dying of an overdose or a fatal car accident. That's an instantaneous thing. So there's a very different moment
Yes.
for family and for a pastor.
Yes.
But kind of going back, I think there's two dynamics. There's one, that sacredness of being with somebody when they're dying. Everything's stripped away. It's not always peaceful. It's not always good in terms of, maybe good's not a good adjective, right adjective. But sometimes people are struggling with unresolved things, but a lot of times that stripping away is getting at the rawness of things that want to be spoken or confessed or
Right.
amended at the deathbed. Powerful things are often said there, but there's a sacredness. There is, if you're with somebody as they die, it's a moment that is holy. It's a holiness. Even if you look at, it's going to be maybe a crude analogy to some of you, but if you look at elephants, and when they form the elephant graveyard, and they all
Yeah.
go and they move the bones around, and there's something happening there that is also sacred. This is coming
Yes.
together, recognizing that there's a cycle to life. We all die, and this is what's next. And that's why I say there's two parts. The other part is the family. So you're dealing with the person who's dying, which is very sacred. And then you're dealing with whatever the relationships or the brokenness is, which again, I say that really creates a different dynamic for what a funeral, the space where God enters, looks like. Because you can have a beautiful familial relationship where there's not I wish I could have, would have, should have, but there's just beauty and there's gratitude, there's sadness because of the love they had, but then there's the other side of it where there's regret, there's bitterness, there's unresolved anger, there's things I couldn't let go of. And that's why I think part of this discussion, maybe our hope for anybody listening, is a real encouragement. Something that I try to do at every funeral is, the funeral is for the people who are left. How are we dealing with this death? How are we dealing with our own mortality and our faith? And how are we living with whatever days we're given? And so when the time comes that we will be remembered, or service will happen, as much as another Pauline verse, as much as it depends upon us in Romans, live at peace, do everything you can to not live with regrets on your deathbed, so that there aren't all these unresolved things, or you're not at a gravesite or family members there, not being able to resolve things that maybe with more effort or prayer or forgiveness we could resolve.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that you're making a really important point, that there is in this process a coming alongside of two different folks in different situations. You have the person who is dying and the family that's left behind, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the reasons that I think that these are sacramental moments is because that's exactly the kind of work that Jesus did, right? As we read the Gospels, he's showing up in people's worst moments regularly in the Gospels and doing what he can to express love and grace and show a way through. And so I guess that's why I think of these moments as very, very sacramental in that way, that the word really does, in some special way, in these particular moments, become flesh and dwell among us. We enflesh grace and love and forgiveness and gratitude and peace in bringing that love of God into the moment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. In as much as possible, if we're allowed to be present before the death occurs, to encourage those words of forgiveness and love to be spoken. If we're not permitted to be present, then to encourage them to be spoken aloud before a body or ashes are interred, inurned, all right, so that they are spoken aloud, right? That it makes such a difference to have them spoken, right? I forgive you. I know you forgive me. I love you. I know you love or have loved me. You know, those kinds of things that to speak them, whether the other person can speak them or not, to speak it aloud. And it's so critical. And yeah, not something, if it's a sudden death at a car crash or whatever, but you know, those, if you're in a hospital or a hospice kind of moment, and remembering, you know, watching with my mom, waiting for her to pass with hospice, and trying to make that the easiest moment we could for her and with her. And you know, a woman who lived a life of faith, but she was not going to let go, and we couldn't figure out why, right? And she hung on for days longer than you would have thought possible, right? She had just gone away into nothing and hadn't eaten, and there had been no liquid, and it's like, Mom, it's not physically possible for you to be alive, so why are you holding on, right? So if you're afraid of something, so we're reading all of the scriptures of fear not, and but we never know what's happening inside another human being and how we can help make that transition easier. So in as much as possible, how can we assist in those times of transition and reassure for the love that waits, but also the love that's being left behind, and the grace and the peace, the compassion for that life that was lived. So, yeah, powerful. So that's different to, you know, that pastoral role, but when it's your mother, you know, you're certainly not the pastor, you're just the kid.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
It's
different.
like, it totally is, right? I'm not your pastor, I'm your daughter, so I'm just talking to you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know this stuff with my head, but I'm feeling it all with my heart, so, yeah, what you gonna do? So, yeah,
Very different dynamic to
completely.
your role is as a pastor. You have a calling to the people of the churches or the community that you're serving, but when it is, your role is superseded often when it's your mom or your sibling or a cousin. And,
Yeah,
when those lines get blurred, it's a very different dynamic to put on those hats.
yeah,
But it's, you know, I used this analogy in a memorial not too long ago, and I like it. It's not my own, but you know, a friend of mine who was a priest in one of the orders in seminary said, you know, we have no idea when we're in the womb what life is going to be like. We, you know, only know the amniotic sac and whatever nourishment we're getting there. But when we come out, you know, it's cold. Doctor checks us with APGAR and all this kind of stuff, tests, and you know, it's foreign. It's all new. But then, you know, life, you experience sunsets, you experience people, hopefully, who love you, and the beauty and struggle of life. Say this isn't so bad, but it's a world you didn't know. And I think of dying in very much the same way. You know, sometimes some of us go kicking and screaming towards it. It's unknown. It's, for many, it's scary. Is it there? We don't know. But that's also that thin place of sacrament where it is the promises of God that God is a God of life through. Page said through. You know, another very famous memorial text associated with Psalm 23, where you lead me through the valley of shadow of death or darkness, where I can't see the light. I don't know what's beyond it, but I'm led through it by the shepherd, whose voice is right. My voice is right. He recognizes, and you know, God leads us into something beyond. So that doesn't have the last word here. I say that at every funeral because I believe that is the Alleluia Easter belief that Death is something we all experience, but it's not the end.
Right. This reminds me, what you're saying, of another great passage from the Apostle Paul, bless him, bless his name, a passage that usually gets read generally at weddings, 1 Corinthians
Oh, yeah.
13, right?
Yeah.
That has that wonderful piece in it that says, "Now I see through a glass darkly, but then I shall see face to face." And then understanding that, that exactly what you were saying, from this side, it is dark, it is dim, it is hard to perceive, things are blurry, we don't get the big picture. But there is something on the other side, and someday we will be able to see it face to face and directly. And again, I think that thing, something that connects that passage to this passage, that thing that we can sense on the other side is love. 1 Corinthians 13 is all about what it is to be in relationship, in enacting love, in fleshing it, making it real. And I think that this passage is very much about that kind of divine love that reaches out for us when things are at their very worst. And one of the things that I love about this particular passage from Romans 8 is that it's not just about the person who has died and offering comfort about where they are and that they're in the embrace of the divine, but that it's also for those who are left behind. Because not even grief or loss or anger or frustration or lack of forgiveness or any of those things has the power to separate us from the love of God. And I find those words very, very comforting when I'm working with families, regardless of where they are on the spectrum. If they're one of those really loving, tight ones where they're just feeling this incredible loss in the moment and trying to make sense of it, or if they're ones that have really troubled relationships and they're carrying a lot of baggage, those things can't separate you from the love of God either. That love is a through line throughout all of that. And so, yeah, and I do love to tie that in with the 23rd Psalm, because there's nowhere we can go that God is not.
I'm going to piggyback on what you said about 1 Corinthians 13, because I use that one a lot too. And it's not just the darkly in a mirror, but it's also the Greek verb tense changes. I know in the present moment, I know in part. I partially know things in the world and the mysteries of life, a smidge in this moment. But there shall come a time, future tense, when I know as I have been known, infinite, ongoing knowing that God has known me a lot better than I know myself even. And so the changes of tense, I know a fraction, but I'm going to know a lot differently because the fullness of that love is, and that's a powerful, I love that. It's a beautiful text. At a time when they, in Corinth, they're all fighting and snipping at each other about who's a better preacher and who's got the gift of healing. And Paul says, "Hey, let me let you know a little secret. The mystery of all this, the foundation of all this, is love. If you don't have that, none of that other stuff matters."
Yeah.
And they're arguing about secret knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, no.
Rabbit hole, no.
That's it. It is. Run.
Oh,
I love it.
Yeah, Paul talks about dying a lot. And one of the challenges of the early church was, you could see it a little bit in Thessalonians, they're asking the question in Thessalonica, when is Jesus coming back? And some of us have died. But what about the rest of us? Are we going to be where they're at? And you get something that's not biblical in terms of, you hear a lot of Christians talk about the rapture, and that's honestly an 1800s development by a Scottish Presbyterian pastor named Darby. But the point is, Paul says, well, we'll all be taken, those who remain will be taken up in a cloud of witnesses and will be basically dancing in the sky. Now, this Paul really is that, he's just basically saying, God's got you. And another thing I like about Paul is when he's talking about dying, he doesn't use the word for the saints that have died, he doesn't say they're dead. He says they've fallen asleep. So it's, again, this temporary. You close your eyes on this earthly life, but just like when you go to bed, you don't realize, unless you're dreaming and you see yourself sleeping, that you're sleeping. You just wake up. Well, Paul says, well, dying to him is like that. He envisions, you close your eyes on this life, you wake up and whew, you're not here anymore, you're someplace else.
Yes.
I wouldn't advise that with children who are concrete thinkers, but with adults,
Right.
that kind of analogy makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Yeah, I think it works exceedingly well for that. And yeah, Paul does talk a lot about this, and it's important to him as to remind people that again, I think your language is the language that I like here. God's got you. I don't know the specifics. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like. I can't tell you how it's going to play out. And I think a lot of, I remember in my younger years having conversations with other Christians who, were really caught on a particular vision of what heaven looks like, right? And it's going to be this and it's going to be that, and this is how it's going to play out. And I don't think that necessarily is anything that we can know, and it's not necessarily super important. What is important in these verses, what Paul is saying over and over and over again, is exactly that. God has got you, and you are held in the hands of love, the same hands that created you and breathed life into you. Those are the hands that have you, and nothing is going to let you fall through the cracks. It's just not going to happen. And I like that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and the passage that started us off, that Romans 8, starts off with, I consider these present sufferings we're going through not worth comparing to the kind of love that God has for us. So, it starts with, not everything's so good here. There are hardships. It is a struggle, but God's got you. So it's not that, because you hear this a lot too, that if you just pray enough, or your prosperity gospel, God's going to bless you, bless you, bless you. Well, no, Jesus says, hey, if you follow me, you're going to get persecuted. It's going to be tough. Life's not going to be easy, but I am with you. Your sorrow will be turned to joy. I've overcome those kind of things. So I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. And your sorrow will be turned to joy, but not your sorrow will be turned to gold and diamonds, and a mansion. That's
right.
Yeah. That's not the one, as we will be conquerors. Well, that language can get turned.
Which is exactly what we talked about on Sunday.
It is,
streets
exactly.
of gold and all the precious stones being in the foundations, and
Right.
Jesus coming back and whooping some serious butt and killing all his enemies, which is very different. I mean, if that's a literal translation, then the nature, the character of Christ, who says, basically the way of the cross is my way, is love, the kind of love, the sacrificial love that would give its life
Right.
for its friends, even for its enemies, is no. If a literal translation of Revelation comes through, then Jesus ends up looking a whole lot how we get our payback as human beings.
Right.
And that's what I think a lot of the reformers and early Catholic reformers also had a challenge with. If people read it this way, it shouldn't be in canon. So anyway, that's a soapbox. I'm sorry.
No.
Justifiable, right? Because otherwise you have to, Jesus really wants revenge.
Yeah.
And anathema, right? Like, not the Jesus I know. It doesn't work that way.
It's like
So-
the cross. Well, not so
Yeah.
much. I changed my mind.
Yeah.
And
No takesies, backsies.
no, and that's
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no, I just feel now is the right time to interject that when I was a teenager,
Yeah.
I was the proud owner of a T-shirt
Well,
that was based on these passages from Revelation, that showed Jesus coming back on a great white horse with a sword in his hand, and it glowed in the dark. So I just felt like this was the right time
is.
to share that particular bit of information.
The printer's messed up, and it's in his mouth. The sword's in his mouth.
That's
You're
it,
right,
see?
you're
Yeah.
right.
It's his words.
It was a mistake.
It's his words, not a literal.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Michelle. I
Yeah.
just-
No, it's, hey,
Yeah.
we shall overcome. So, yeah, there it is. Nice overcoming there.
Was
Yeah.
Immigrant playing in the background when he was writing this? All right, I'm sorry. Anyway, just
No, but I'll bet
just wanted
Petra
to-
was.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's painful.
Yeah, but
I'm not sure where we go from here.
yeah, how do you come back from that? I don't really know.
I
But it was interesting when you were talking about the fact that this is exactly what you were talking about last week when you were talking about Revelation. That the whole point of the book of Revelation, as I understand it, is to remind people in the midst of what is the worst that they could possibly go through, that there is hope.
Yes.
Right? And that God is present in the midst with us and has not let us go. And again, there's nowhere we can walk that God has not already been there, which I think is the testimony of the scriptures that we get. And so while you were talking about that as the recap, I'm like, this is perfect. This is this dovetails together really nicely because that's exactly what this scripture passage is trying to say too. I think that there is that hope and that profound, deep, abiding peace in the midst of all of this, that God's love does prevail. I also love the language that's in here. We use it. I use it. I don't usually. I admit it freely. I may be not a good Protestant in this particular way, but I don't take time in every single worship service that I do to do a prayer of confession and absolution. I usually save that for Lent because that seems appropriate. But this language here that reminds us very clearly who is in a position to condemn us? Well, only Jesus Christ. And this is the same one who came for us and lived for us and died for us and rose again for us. So why would we fear the judgment of the one who did that? We are so incredibly dear to God, and I think that sometimes we miss the boat on that. We get wrapped up in other things. We get wrapped up in our own sense of failure, our own sense of falling short, and it's good to be reminded that that's not the way that God counts things. And we are all better off for that. So again, this is another piece, I think, for a lot of folks in times of dying and times of families that are grieving, to be able to speak that language too. I mean, I'm surprised still when I sit with families and people who are dying who are afraid, and hey, they need to hear those words again. That there is justification and love that greets you here, and so that's just a piece of the scripture too that I wanted to highlight really quickly as one of those places where I just find real hope.
I think you put your finger on a place. I'm going to switch gears a little bit,
Sure.
which is probably the most challenging piece, or maybe where some fear, not all, but some of that may be based. Because I hear a lot of times a family member struggling with, where is my dad going? How is God going to judge him? And particularly, I guess that's true across the spectrum of belief, and that is something that people get anxious about, worked up about, distraught about. And I guess from my part, I would say that a family member, while close to somebody who has died, you're depending on your knowing of that loved one and what you know of them. But that's very different than God's knowing of them and our understanding of grace and forgiveness versus God's understanding of grace and forgiveness. I always go back to the book of Jonah because I think it's just a beautiful example of that disparity or contrast between human insight of what people deserve, Jonah and the Ninevites, they deserve God to throw the book at him, and God saying, I'm going to give him mercy. And Joseph,
Darn it.
that's why I didn't want to go. Because
Precisely.
you're too nice, you're too merciful, you're too full of grace. Send somebody else. And that book is so powerful to me because when it comes to God's love and grace, does any of us really, we don't earn it? I mean, does any of us earn it? No. Deserve it? I mean, my gosh, sometimes we fall short with each other and with God, and God's patience. So it's not about deserve. And so I try to steer those concerns that way, but I don't know if your experience is nice with that, but that is a challenge of a memorial time.
Absolutely.
Funeral time.
We judge ourselves and we judge each other so incredibly harshly.
Yeah, sometimes we want them and
Absolutely.
to suffer.
Yeah, that's right. My dad's going to suffer, right?
Light it up.
Come on, which is, yeah. Not the first time I will on this show say, cray cray for coconuts, right? It's like, stop it. So, I know, sorry. Yeah. The God that I understand doesn't work that way. Just does not work that way. And to be able to pull out the Romans texts or various gospel texts and to say, this is not at all how I understand it. And if you can, in that moment of crucifixion, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, then I'm pretty sure it wasn't your dad doing that. And yeah, there's horrible stuff that we live through and we have experienced, but forgiveness and grace are at the core of this. So, yeah, there's a peace that passes all human understanding. And we're wrestling with our human understanding and a divine entity. So, that's where we... Okay, so, sorry. Now I feel like I have
No,
babbled on.
No,
for
not at all.
A long period of time. But
No.
So we want to then ask people to join us.
they'll be joining the two of you or one of you as
Oh,
I'll
yes.
just be coming out of
Join-
surgery. So, yeah.
Join at least myself and maybe Paige, depending on how surgery is going today, because Pastor Michelle will be otherwise unavoidably
Anesthetized.
detained.
she might actually be in a really interesting space to lead
Yeah,
discussion.
well, we'll see if we can get her on. All juiced up with anesthetic and medications.
It's an interesting, loopy kind of day.
Join us for discussion about death and dying in a Christian funeral and the sacredness therein tonight on our Zoom. The Zoom link will be on your Facebook page and on the church website and Pod Be With You.
And Pod Be With You, which will probably be released Thursday. You can find it on any of your formats and that you use to get podcasts. So
There you go.
we're there.
Beautiful.
And thank you, Paige, for joining us today.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
You won't see me for a while, but thank you for joining in. I'll be back see you in September.
September,
Okay.
October, one of those, yeah.
Yeah, but thank you.
Yeah.